Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, February 2nd, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. The U.S. does not know if Iran was involved in the Jordan drone attack. So Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin on Thursday admitted the U.S. does not know if Iran was operationally involved in the drone attack in Jordan that killed 3 American soldiers. On the same day, U.S. officials told CBS News that plans have been approved for strikes against Iranian personnel and facilities in Iraq and Syria. So when he was asked by a reporter about how much Iran knew about the drone attack or if it was operationally involved, Austin's response was, quote, "We believe that this was done by an element of what is known as the axis of resistance, and these are Iranian proxy groups. And how much Iran knew and didn't know, we don't know. But it really doesn't matter because Iran sponsors these groups," end quote. So again, this is the thinking, is that Iran arms these groups. That means that they must be responsible and we have to hit Iran. But they have no idea if Iran ordered the attack, was involved in any way beyond the support that they give these groups. And it doesn't matter. They're still planning to strike Iran in response to this, which is just, if it provokes a full-blown war with Iran, a lot more American troops are going to be killed. Austin said that if the Shia militias the U.S. believes were responsible for the attack were not supported by Iran, that these kind of things wouldn't happen. And you could say the same for all the conflicts that the U.S. is involved in. The U.S. has said that it believes the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, an umbrella group of Iraqi militias, was responsible for the attack. Kateb Hezbollah announced on Tuesday that it was suspending attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria, which was the result of pressure from the Iraqi government and Iran, and this shows that Iran does not seek more escalations in the region. So on Thursday, this was interesting, Reuters reported that Iran was reducing its presence in Syria after Israeli airstrikes on Damascus killed 5 members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps on January 20th. So 5 Iranians were killed then by Israel. In December, Israel killed a senior IRGC officer who was based in Syria. So this report said that they were pulling some of these military advisors out that they have in Syria because over fears of being sucked into a major regional war. However, El Mayadeen, which is a Lebanese news outlet, they cited sources who said the story was not true and that they were not scaling back their deployment from Syria. So who knows what the story is there, but definitely interesting to see that Iran might be scaling back its presence in Syria, which could be, they say it's related to what happened with Israel, but it could be kind of another signal to the U.S. that, Iran is not looking for a fight here. And Iran has vowed that it will respond to any U.S. attacks, whether they're inside Iran or against Iranians elsewhere in the region. The U.S. officials, U.S. officials told CBS on Thursday that the plans were approved for these strikes against Iranians in Iraq and Syria, not just against the Shia militias, the Iran-backed militias, but actual, the Iranian military. Because the thing I covered yesterday was that they were probably going to do that, and now this says, yeah, this is the plan, which it's strange that they're putting it out there. So I think kind of the best case scenario here is that the U.S. gives Iran some kind of idea of what it's going to hit. Iran clears it out. The U.S. blows up some warehouses, and that's it. Everybody kind of steps back. But there's so many different factors here with everything that's going on in the region that there's just such a huge risk of this thing really exploding into a big, big war here. So we'll see. But and another thing about this is that they're not saying, they're just going to launch some strikes. They're saying that this is going to last a long time. The thing I covered yesterday said it was going to be a weeks-long bombing campaign, and that's what Austin hinted at on Thursday. He told reporters that the U.S. was planning a multi-tiered approach. He said, quote, "We have the ability to respond a number of times depending on what the situation is," end quote. So, and then when it comes to the timeline, really not clear when these U.S. strikes might start. It could be very soon. They could wait a little longer. It's not clear. All right, so the next one here, a U.S. Navy ship had a close call with a Houthi missile in the Red Sea. The U.S. Navy destroyer USS Gravely had a close call with a Houthi missile in the Red Sea on Tuesday night. The U.S. officials told CNN that a cruise missile launched by the Houthis came within 1 mile of the Gravely, and that's the closest a missile has come to a U.S. warship since these, amid these current escalations. And that means the missile got past the Gravely's sophisticated defense systems, which includes the Aegis, I believe that's how you pronounce it, the Aegis Ashore system, which is how they intercept most missiles and drones. And the missile was downed by what they call a close-in weapon system, which is really just a machine gun that is designed for close-range interceptions. So that's what they shot it down with, and this really highlights the danger to U.S. warships and Navy sailors deployed in the Red Sea to combat the Houthis. As far as I know, there's been no Houthi missile or drone that's hit an American warship. They've hit American commercial ships, but they haven't hit any warships yet. But it could just be similar to the way it was just a matter of time before a drone or a rocket that was being fired at a U.S. base in Iraq and Syria slipped through the air defenses and killed American troops. This could just be a matter of time as well. I mean, things are heating up. It seems like there's more and more, the Houthis are firing more missiles and drones and stuff. So the U.S. actually launched more strikes against the Houthis early Thursday morning Yemen time, which was at least the 12th time that the U.S. has bombed Yemen since President Biden started his new war against the Houthis on January 12th. U.S. Central Command claimed that the strikes targeted a Houthi drone station. And the escalations continued throughout the day on Thursday as CENTCOM said that it downed a Houthi drone and destroyed a drone boat. Later, the Houthis targeted a British-linked cargo ship, but CENTCOM said the missiles impacted the water and did not hit the ship. So since the U.S. and the U.K. launched their first round of strikes against the Houthis, things have really escalated. The Houthis are now targeting American and British commercial shipping. I know people who were in the military or Navy know much more about these missile systems and stuff that these U.S. Navy destroyers have. They're saying, if the Houthis launched like a huge drone swarm and some missiles at the same time, that could potentially get past the defenses. But it looks like things aren't slowing down when it comes to this new U.S. war against the Houthis. All right, so the next one here, Representative Mast says that Palestinian babies are not innocent. So this is really something. Members of Code Pink, which is the anti-war activist group, they're very active in D.C. on Capitol Hill, confronting politicians, disrupting Senate hearings and things like that. So they confronted Representative Brian Mast, who's a Republican from Florida, and he's a former member of the Israeli Defense Forces. They confronted him about Palestinian babies being killed by Israel in Gaza, and Mast told them babies were not innocent. So Medea Benjamin, who's a co-founder of Code Pink, asked Mast, quote, "You haven't seen the pictures of all the babies being killed?" End quote. So that was her question. And what he said right after that was, quote, "These are not innocent Palestinian civilians across the world," end quote. So that was his response to her. I watched this video a bunch of times to make sure it wasn't edited in any way. That's what he said when she mentioned the babies being killed. "These are not innocent Palestinian civilians," was his response. Then he was asked about the 500,000 Palestinian civilians who are said to be starving in the Gaza Strip. And this was his response. He said, quote, The 500,000 people starving to death are people that should go out there and put a government in place that doesn't go out there and attack Israel on a daily basis, end quote. So not challenging any of the things that they're saying, just saying, yeah, it doesn't matter. The congressman was also asked about the sheer destruction caused by the Israeli bombing campaign, which is comparable to the Allied strategic bombing campaigns of World War II. One activist said that they've destroyed more infrastructure in Gaza than they did in Dresden during World War II, in Dresden, Germany. And Mast's response was, quote, and there's more infrastructure that needs to be destroyed, end quote. So he's saying, destroy it all. And he has previously invoked World War II to justify Israel's slaughter in Gaza. He said on the House floor back in November, basically, that there's no innocent Palestinian civilians. He said, quote, I would encourage the other side to not so lightly throw around the idea of innocent Palestinian civilians. I don't think we would so lightly throw around the term innocent Nazi civilians during World War II, end quote. So that's what this guy is about. And a few days after October 7th, he showed up on Capitol Hill wearing his IDF uniform. So, the fact that that's not a huge scandal, it's just, and he's justifying the mass murder of civilians and children, just really sick stuff. So he said he's the only member of Congress to serve both with the U.S. Army and the Israeli Defense Forces. He's very proud. I was reading about his history. He was 12 years in the Army, and in 2015, he volunteered with the IDF. That was right before he joined Congress. So that's what he's all about. Kill, kill, kill. All right, so the next one here. Israel destroys a Belgian aid agency office in Gaza. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So a Belgian official posted photos showing the building housing its aid agency's office in Gaza was destroyed by an Israeli airstrike on the besieged Palestinian enclave. The building was targeted as Belgium is refusing to cut off assistance to the Palestinian UN aid agency. So Belgium was one of the countries, the U.S., I know the U.K., I think France, cut off aid to UNRWA, the UN's Palestinian Relief Agency. Other countries did as well. I'm not sure all of them. But Belgium didn't. And here their aid office is now been bombed. Is that a coincidence? It's hard to believe that it is. And this is just another example of attacks on civilian infrastructure, aid infrastructure. So the next story here, Palestinians demand an international inquiry after mass graves found in Gaza. So this article is from Al Jazeera. It says Palestinian authorities have demanded an international investigation after a mass grave was found in Gaza with the decomposing bodies of Palestinian detainees who were blindfolded and handcuffed. At least 30 bodies were found in black plastic bags near the Hamad school in northern Gaza, which was an elementary school. Palestinian officials are accusing Israeli soldiers of killing the civilians execution style. So the Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs is calling for an international investigation. Witnesses told Al Jazeera that the deceased were blindfolded, tortured, and killed before being placed in the bags, and the bodies were found with blindfolds and their legs and their hands were tied. So that does sound like they were executed. Just really horrific thing to find at an elementary school in the Gaza Strip. All right, so the next one here. Judge urges Biden to examine unflagging support for Israel. So this article is from Common Dreams, and it's about this case in the U.S., and this was a federal judge in California. A case was brought about by Palestinian Americans. It was a lawsuit against Biden saying that he hasn't done enough to prevent genocide. And basically the ruling was that it was outside of the court's jurisdiction. But the judge was very compelled by the testimony he heard from Palestinians, both Palestinian Americans who have family that were killed, and he heard testimony from Palestinians in Gaza, and said that basically the Biden administration needs to re-examine what it's doing here, and said that the ICJ, and he referenced that the ICJ case found it was plausible that Israel's committing genocide. So that's kind of where this case ended. And the Palestinian Americans who brought this lawsuit said that they were still devastated that the court would not take the important step to stop Biden from continuing to support the slaughter of the Palestinian people. All right. So the next one here, where am I? Hamas received hostage proposal positively. So this is according to Qatar. A Qatari official told Reuters on Thursday that Hamas has received the latest hostage deal proposal positively, but said there was no agreement yet. And these comments came after Qatar's foreign ministry spokesman said that Hamas gave, the wording that they used was, Hamas gave its initial positive confirmation about the proposal, which many media outlets, many people that saw that took that as Hamas agreeing to a hostage deal. But that's not what happened. And Hamas kind of quickly denied that an agreement was reached, but they're studying the proposal. And this deal, according to the latest reports, the deal that's on the table now would involve a 6-week truce and the release of the remaining Israeli civilians still being held in Gaza. Israel would also release 3 Palestinian prisoners for every Israeli that is freed from Gaza. So this is not as... So the initial offer was 2-month truce. Hamas releases all the Israeli hostages that it has, including the soldiers. This deal does not include the soldiers because Hamas's response to the other one was, nope, we're not going to release all of them unless we get a permanent ceasefire and Israeli troops withdraw from Gaza. But Netanyahu has rejected that. So this is the deal that's on the table. Hopefully it moves forward and they get the truce happens. Part of it is getting more aid in and all that. But I would hope that during that 6 weeks, things would really cool down in the region, maybe, hopefully. I think, when it comes to the U.S. and the Houthis and other areas, they could cool down as well. And then hopefully during that 6 weeks, there's a big push, big push toward ending it altogether. But we'll see how it plays out. At the same time, it's hard for me to believe that Netanyahu's going to agree to anything like that. He wants to go, full steam ahead. So does the members of his government are threatening to quit if he accepts a deal like this. So we'll see. And then the Israeli operations, they showed no sign of slowing down. On Thursday, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that the next target for Israeli ground forces is Rafah, which is the southern Gaza city that is packed with 1.5 million Palestinians. So many Palestinians fled the north. They fled to Khan Yunis. They had to flee from there, and now they're in Rafah. And their people are packed in there, living in tents on the streets. So that's where the next big operations are going to happen. So how many are going to be killed and slaughtered in that? And the death toll on Thursday exceeded 27,000, according to Gaza's health ministry. 27,000 killed, over 66,000 have been wounded, and about 70%, the majority of the casualties are women and children. And also, this does not include the thousands. I believe the number is something like 8,000 that they believe are missing and are presumed to be dead under the rubble or dying, if they were recently trapped. All right. So the next one here, the U.S. sanctions 4 Israeli settlers as hundreds of Palestinians are killed in the West Bank. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone, and it says President Joe Biden signed an executive order allowing Washington to blacklist Israeli settlers that attack Palestinians in the West Bank. Over the past 4 months, there has been widespread violence against Palestinians in the West Bank, killing nearly 100 children and driving thousands from their homes. On Thursday, a senior White House official told reporters that Biden signed this order. So the initial round of sanctions targets 4 Israelis. This is kind of like, I think, just the Biden administration doing something to say that they did something. Sanctions on 4 settlers. It's not really a big deal. But Netanyahu denounced the executive order. Of course, he's unhappy. He said, quote, Israel acts against all lawbreakers everywhere, so there is no room for exceptional measures in this regard, end quote. And there's been over 500 settler attacks against Palestinians in the West Bank since October 7th. And they're trying to, they want to force people out. They want to take over their houses and their land. That's their MO. And there's many members of the Netanyahu government, including Netanyahu himself, who they want to expand settlements. That's something when they formed the government coalition, that was one of their priorities, was to increase settlements with the ultimate goal of annexing the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, as they call it. And then you have the real hardcore settlers in the government, Itamar Ben-Gvir and I'm blanking on Bezalel Smotrich. They're both settlers themselves, and of course they were not happy with the U.S. doing this. All right, so the next one here, the EU agrees on a $50 billion euro aid package for Ukraine. So the EU successfully pressured Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban to approve a $50 billion euro, which is 54 billion US dollars, aid package to Ukraine, and EU leaders agreed to push through the spending on Thursday. Ahead of the summit, Financial Times reported that the EU was threatening to sabotage Hungary's economy if Orban vetoed the spending package. A European diplomat acknowledged to Financial Times that the strategy was blackmail. And Orban also held one-on-one meetings with some European leaders who convinced him to approve the aid. So the 50 billion euros is economic aid meant to be dispersed to Ukraine from 2024 to 2027. As part of the negotiations, Orban wanted a chance to veto payments to Ukraine each year, but EU officials refused that condition and settled on allowing regular reviews of the spending. So Orban portrayed his approval of the aid package as a victory and said that Hungarian funds would not be going to Ukraine. He said, quote, "Mission accomplished. Hungary's funds will not end up in Ukraine, and we have a control mechanism at the end of the first and second year. Our position on the war in Ukraine remains unchanged. We need a ceasefire and peace talks," end quote. So that control mechanism he's talking about, I think, is just a review of how the aid is getting spent and something like that. So Ukraine's going to get their 50 billion euros. Again, this is over from 2024 to 2027. It's nothing compared to the $61 billion that Biden's trying to get for 1 year, which includes some economic aid, but it's mostly military aid. So this EU aid is economic. I don't know if I mentioned that, but it's kind of what they call this budgetary aid that goes straight to the Ukrainian government and pays government salaries, pensions, and things like that. So the Zelensky government will be very happy that they get this. All right, so the next one here. There's a new U.S. stockpile in Australia to prepare for war over Taiwan. So the U.S. has created a new stockpile of military equipment during drills in Australia last summer to prepare for a future war with China over Taiwan. The stockpile was left behind after the Talisman Sabre exercises, which ran from July 22nd to August 4th last summer. And they were billed as the largest ever iteration of the drill, really showing, the U.S. focus on the region and the preparation for a future conflict in the Asia Pacific. So Reuters reported that the U.S. left behind equipment, including 330 vehicles and trailers and 130 containers in a warehouse in Bandiana, a suburb of Wandonga, which is a city in southeastern Australia. It's not clear what are in those containers in the warehouse, but they say the supplies are enough to supply 3 logistics companies that would be focused on getting equipment to U.S. troops who are fighting a war elsewhere in the region. General Charles Flynn, who's the top Army commander in the Pacific, he said, quote, "We're looking to do this more and more. There's a number of other countries in the region where we already have agreements to do that," end quote. So the U.S. is working to establish similar stockpiles in the Philippines, Japan, and other countries in the region, and Congress wants to establish a weapons stockpile in Taiwan itself, something that might not be publicized due to the risk of provoking China, but that's something they're probably already working on that. U.S. Army Secretary Christine Wormuth, she said last year that the Army's role in a future war with China would be to establish staging bases for the Navy, for the Marines, and for the Air Force, and to provide what she called intra-theater sustainment using the weapon stockpiles and watercraft. So saying that the Army would move stuff around the region. And she said the Army would also have a role to play in the homeland, since a full-blown war with the U.S. and between the U.S. and China would likely spread. She said, quote, "If we got into a major war with China, the United States homeland would be at risk as well, with both kinetic attacks and non-kinetic attacks," end quote. So this is what they're talking about and openly preparing for. U.S. military officials make it no secret that they're prepping for war with China. The way that they frame it is that, oh, we're trying to deter war. That's the last thing we want. But if we have to fight a war, we have to be able to win it. And while what they call deterrence is actually provocation, and it's just making war in the region more likely, because of course China is reacting and things just continue to, heat up. Australia is a long way from Taiwan, but the U.S. has big plans for Australia. With this submarine deal, the U.S. is going to be stationing long-range bombers there, and things like that. All right, so the next one here, the last story, Taiwan's KMT secures speaker's chair in the parliament. So this article is from South China Morning Post, and the Kuomintang, which is the main opposition party in Taiwan and is more friendly with mainland China than much more than the Democratic Progressive Party, is one of their senior officials was elected to be the speaker of Taiwan's parliament. And so when the new government comes in, which is in a few months, that William Lai Ching-te is sworn in. He's the current vice president, member of the Democratic Progressive Party, the more independence-minded leaning party. The Kuomintang is going to have control of the legislature, which could make things a little more difficult when it comes to the things that the DPP wants to do to move away, to move closer to the U.S. and the West in general. So we'll see. I don't know how much legislation they're going to want to pass related to that, but this will make it more difficult. I saw the write-up in the Associated Press about this described the Kuomintang as the pro-unification party, but it's not a way to characterize them. They're not pro-unification. They're pro-status quo, basically. And the status quo has been changed in the past few years under the DPP, and they want to reduce. They want to talk to China, which it seems so crazy to Western media that there's a lot of people in Taiwan. Actually, all the polling shows that the majority of people in Taiwan, they don't want unification with China, but they don't want independence. It's usually around 80%, 70 to 80% say they want to maintain the status quo. But the Kuomintang would definitely want to reduce tensions with Beijing and start a dialogue at least. All right, so that's it for the news for today. Go check out our Viewpoints. One from Doug Bandow: seizing Russian assets, ruble wise but dollar foolish. One from John J. Duncan Jr.: terrible tragedies continue in unjust war. One from Maha Halal: Israel, the United States, and the rhetoric of the war on terror. One from Andrew Coburn: Admiral Fabuloso thumps his tub. And one from Stephen Kinzer: the time Ronald Reagan kept the U.S. out of war in the Middle East. And this is an important story. This is about in the 1980s, the 1983 Beirut barracks bombing, when the U.S. was getting involved in the Lebanese civil war and the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. And that bombing, truck bombing, killed over 200 U.S. Marines. And Reagan pulled out. He got out of there. That was his calculation was, if they wanted to find the bombers, the people that did it, they would have gotten totally sucked into Lebanon's civil war. So it's certainly a lesson to learn there. 3 U.S. troops killed when it was obvious they were going to be killed. The way things were going in the region. Why start another big war where more are going to get killed when you could just pull out? But anyway, that's everything. Go check out our blog. We have tons of stuff in the lower half of the page. So much stuff going on. I try to cover the most important things here. But that's it for me for the week. I hope everybody has a good weekend. You could always support this show by sharing, liking, subscribing. All that stuff helps out. I'll be back in a few days. Thanks for listening.